I'm pregnant.
I'm pregnant. Two words that are supposed to be a symphony of joy. For me, they were the deafening crash that signaled the end of everything I knew. My husband David and I had been trying for a baby for 5 long years. 5 years of ovulation kits, temperature tracking, and scheduled intimacy that felt anything but intimate. 5 years of doctor's appointments that started with hopeful smiles and ended with quiet clinical condolences. It was a marathon of quiet heartbreak run together, or so I thought. And now, here was this woman, a girl, really, named Chloe, standing on my doorstep, her youth a stark contrast to my own weary experience. She was telling me she was carrying his child, the child I had prayed for, cried for, and reconfigured my entire life to welcome. In a single shattering instant, the world I had so carefully constructed was reduced to rubble. But what I did next, not even I saw coming. Because in the middle of all that wreckage, surrounded by the shards of my broken heart, I did the one thing no one in the world would ever expect. I took her in. The ground beneath my feet didn't just crack. It split wide open, revealing a chasm so deep I was sure it would swallow me whole. 1 minute, I was a wife, meticulously planning a 10-year anniversary trip, mentally scrolling through destinations and imagining us on a beach. The next, I was standing on my own welcome mat, staring at the woman who was living a secret, parallel part of my husband's life. Her hand was resting on a small, but very real, baby bump. It was a gesture I had dreamed of making myself for years. The air in our doorway grew thick, charged with the raw, static energy of betrayal. But in that moment, looking at this woman, who wasn't the monster I might have imagined, but just a person, as lost and terrified as I was, an impulse I still can't fully explain took over. My body was screaming with rage, but my soul did something else. Instead of slamming the door in her face, an act every fiber of my being yearned for, I opened it wider. This is the story of how my husband's affair didn't just end my marriage. It started the most painful, bizarre, and transformative journey of my entire life. The first stage of grief is supposed to be denial, and I felt that deep in my bones, a cold anesthetic seeping into my marrow. It was like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. Our perfectly manicured lawn, the cheerful yellow front door I'd insisted on painting last spring, this young woman with tears silently tracing paths down her cheeks. None of it felt real. It was a surreal, out-of-body experience. David had been distant, sure. The business trips had become more frequent, his explanations for late nights at the office more vague. But I had actively, forcefully, silenced that little whisper of doubt in the back of my mind. I told myself it was the stress of work, the strain of our infertility struggles. Now, that whisper was a deafening roar that blocked out everything else. Chloe wasn't what I'd pictured. My mind, in its darkest moments, had conjured a hardened, vampiric homewrecker. The reality was a trembling 24-year-old, a full decade younger than me, swimming in a worn-out hoodie. She told me, her voice cracking, that the affair had been going on for nearly a year. A year. 365 days of a secret life he lived right alongside ours. My mind reeled, trying to reconcile the man who kissed me goodbye every morning with the man who had been with her. How do you even begin to process that level of deception? When David came home a couple of hours later, the silence in our living room was so heavy I thought I might suffocate. I was sitting on the couch. Chloe was opposite me, a box of tissues between us like a white flag. The moment he walked in and saw us both there, he knew. The color drained from his face. The truth was out. A venomous snake uncoiled in the center of our home, and he didn't even try to deny it. The affair, the baby, it was all real. He just stood there, his car keys dangling from his hand, and whispered, "Oh, God." The betrayal was a physical blow that knocked the wind out of me, leaving me unable to breathe, unable to think. I went through the motions, listening as they both tried to stumble through explanations, their words a meaningless buzz in my ears. My mind was just gone. It had become a blank white space, a system shut down to protect me from a pain too massive to feel all at once. I remember looking at my hands in my lap, thinking they didn't look like my hands. Eventually, I found my voice, and it was colder than I'd ever heard it. I asked them both to leave. That night, I didn't cry. I just sat on the floor of what was supposed to be our nursery, in a room painted a soft, hopeful blue. I stared at the empty crib we'd spent an entire Saturday building together, laughing and arguing over the instructions. I had prayed for a baby with every cell in my body, and one was finally coming. It just wasn't coming to me. That protective numbness was a temporary mercy. Within a day, it gave way to pure, white-hot rage. I wanted to shatter every plate in our kitchen, to rip his clothes to shreds, to scream until my throat was raw. I wanted him to hurt just a fraction of how much he had broken me. How could he? How could he do this to us? I replayed every late night, every flimsy excuse, every "I love you" that now felt like a lie. The business trip to Chicago that coincided with a music festival she'd posted about. The sudden interest in a new hobby I knew nothing about. The signs were all there, a constellation of red flags I had refused to see, and my failure to see them made me feel like an absolute fool. Then, just as the rage would peak, grief would hit me like a tidal wave, pulling me under into its cold, dark depths. I wasn't just mourning a marriage. I was mourning the future I'd planned so carefully since I was a little girl. I was mourning the innocent trust I'd placed in the person I loved most in the world. It was the death of an illusion, the illusion of our perfect love story, of our shared future, of my own judgment. The what-ifs were a special kind of torture, a constant, insidious loop playing in my head. What if I were younger, prettier, thinner? What if I hadn't been so focused on my career, so proud of my recent promotion? Was I too independent? Not needy enough? The stress of infertility. Had I become a person who was impossible to live with, a walking embodiment of disappointment? Did I push him away with my single-minded obsession with having a baby? I cycled endlessly through blaming myself, then him, then her, caught in a dizzying, painful vortex of responsibility. Then came the darkness. A deep, hollow sadness settled in my chest, so heavy that some days, just swinging my legs out of bed felt like an impossible climb. I felt so utterly, profoundly alone. My friends and family were furious for me, their anger a protective shield they tried to wrap around me. "Leave him," they all said, their voices a unified chorus. "Kick him to the curb, how can you even think about it?" A part of me screamed to do just that, to burn it all down and walk away. But a quieter, more confusing voice whispered to just wait. But wait for what? The answer, when it came, would be more radical and life-altering than any of them could ever imagine. A few weeks later, my phone rang. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of cold coffee, when her name flashed on the screen. It was Chloe, and she was sobbing, her voice ragged with panic. Her parents, staunchly religious, had kicked her out after she confessed. She'd been fired from her waitressing job because her boss didn't want a drama situation. She was 24 years old, pregnant, and living in her car. She was terrified and completely alone. And David? He was hiding out at a friend's house, paralyzed by his own guilt and shame, answering her calls but offering no real solutions. Hearing the raw animal desperation in her voice, something in me broke open. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was empathy, a powerful, gut-wrenching empathy. For the first time, I saw her not as the other woman, the villain in my story, but as a scared young person about to have a baby in the worst possible circumstances. And that baby, that innocent child, was my husband's. In some strange, undeniable way, it was my stepchild. None of this was the baby's fault. The thought hit me out of nowhere, so clear and so loud it was shocking. Bring her home. It was the most insane idea I had ever had. Every rational part of my brain screamed, no. This is the woman who slept with your husband. This is the living symbol of your deepest pain. My friends would think I'd had a complete psychological breakdown. My family would be horrified. But the impulse felt bigger than my own pain, bigger than my pride. What if this was the only way through the fire, instead of just letting it consume me? My hands were shaking as I called David and told him my plan. He was stunned into a long silence, followed by a stammered, Are you okay? I think you've snapped." Then I called Chloe back. I could hear the suspicion in her voice as I told her to come over. When she arrived on my doorstep for the second time, she had a single, worn-out duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She looked even smaller and more fragile than before. As I showed her to the guest room, the very room that was supposed to be our nursery, with its soft blue walls and empty crib, I felt a strange kind of calm settle over me. I had absolutely no idea what was going to happen next. But for the first time since my world fell apart, I felt like I was taking a step forward, not just sinking deeper into the abyss. Living with my husband's pregnant mistress was every bit as impossible and emotionally taxing as it sounds. The house, once my sanctuary, was now a fragile truce zone, thick with awkward silences and unspoken resentments. Every room held a memory of the life I'd lost. and Chloe's growing belly was a constant, living reminder of why it was gone. Silent breakfasts were the worst, the only sound the clinking of spoons against ceramic. David moved back in a week later, but he was a ghost in his own home. He tiptoed around, a man caught between his duty to the pregnant woman in the guest room and his desperate, clumsy attempts to fix what he'd broken with me. The tension was a physical presence, suffocating us all. We had explosive, gut-wrenching fights, usually late at night, where all my pain, rage, and insecurity came pouring out. I screamed, I cried, I accused him of everything under the sun, and he just stood there and took it, his face a mask of shame. Through it all, Chloe would disappear into her room, the silent, unwilling source of our war. But then there were these small, baffling moments of unexpected grace. I found Chloe crying in the kitchen late one night, overwhelmed by fear, loneliness, and raging pregnancy hormones. My first instinct was to turn and walk away. Instead, I made her a cup of tea and just sat with her at the table. We talked for hours, not as rivals, but as two women caught in an impossible storm, our lives tangled together by the actions of one man. It was a strange, fragile bond, forged in the fires of our shared predicament. We started therapy, individually and as a couple. It was our lifeline in a churning sea of chaos. Our therapist helped us see that my choice, as wild and self-destructive as it seemed on the surface, was an act of taking back control. It was my way of refusing to be just a passive victim in my own story. But talking is one thing, living it is another. As Chloe's belly grew, the baby became more and more real. We went to doctor's appointments. All three of us, a bizarre trio in the waiting room. We felt the baby kick. I watched David's face light up, a look of pure joy, immediately followed by a shadow of guilt as his eyes met mine. We even decorated the nursery together, turning it from a room of sorrow into one of preparation. It was surreal and at times excruciating. But with every passing day, I felt my heart, against all logic, making room. The question was, would it be enough? The day Chloe went into labor, a strange, profound calm settled over the house. The arguments and tension that had been our daily reality just faded away. All that mattered was getting this baby here, safely. David and I drove her to the hospital, me in the back seat with her, coaching her breathing just like we'd seen in the birthing class I had insisted we all attend. I held her hand for hours as she went through the agony and effort of labor, and finally she brought a beautiful, healthy baby girl into the world. David cut the cord, tears streaming down his face. They named her Grace, and holding Grace, for the first time, something fundamental shifted in me forever. All the theories, the therapy, the pain, it all melted away. I didn't feel the sting of betrayal. I didn't see the product of an affair. I just saw a perfect, innocent soul, her tiny hand wrapped around my finger. And in that moment, with a certainty that defied all logic, I simply fell in love. All the pain, all the anger, all the insanity had led to this perfect little being. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights, mountains of diapers, and a crash course in co-parenting. We were a strange, cobbled-together family, but we were a family. I was a mother in a way I'd never imagined. David was finally a father, present and devoted, and Chloe was a new mom, young, but so fierce and natural in her love for her daughter. We navigated it all together under one roof. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of jealousy and quiet resentment that would flare up unexpectedly. But we were all unequivocally committed to Grace. Eventually, after that first year, Chloe got a good job and found her own apartment nearby. It was the right next step for her, for all of us. But as she packed up her and Grace's things, we all stood in the doorway and cried. Could this new kind of family, born from such wreckage, really survive the separation? This journey taught me everything about forgiveness, compassion, and a love bigger than I ever thought possible. My story is unconventional, and I'm sure you have questions, maybe even judgments. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been forced to find forgiveness in an impossible situation? Share your story below. And if you're in the throes of healing from a betrayal, please know you are not alone. Subscribe for more stories about navigating life's most difficult moments and finding your way back to yourself. It's been 6 years since that day on my front porch. David and I are still together. Our marriage isn't what it was. It couldn't be. It's something entirely new. It's stronger, rebuilt from the ashes with brutal honesty and a foundation of radical forgiveness. We have our own child now, a son who was born 3 years after Grace. Grace is a bright, happy, whip-smart little girl. She has 2 homes, and she knows she has 2 mothers who adore her, and a father who is completely present and active in her life. She knows her story in a simple way a child can understand, and she is surrounded by so much love that her world feels whole. Our blended, unconventional family is proof that love can grow in the most unexpected, broken places. I still have scars. There are days, anniversaries, or just quiet moments when the memory of what happened stings. But the white-hot anger is gone, replaced by a deep and abiding gratitude for the strength I never knew I had. I chose a path most people wouldn't, not because it was easy, it was the hardest thing I've ever done, but because it was the only way I could truly heal. I chose to see the human being in the woman who had hurt me, and in doing so, I found my own humanity again. My story isn't about excusing an affair, it's about what can happen after the devastation. It's about the power of the human heart to choose love over hate, and how sometimes the most painful endings are the start of the most beautiful and unexpected beginnings. So if you've ever faced something you thought you couldn't survive, you're not alone. Like this video, share your story in the comments, and subscribe for more journeys of resilience and hope.